Howdy, y'all. It's Curious Raven. Today we are doing a creepypasta. It is by PeaceSim and it's called Madeline. Many people go through a mopey, nobody wants to date me phase. I was in the midst of mine a few years back when I was a junior in college. There's nothing particularly dramatic about it. I had no interest in romance in my teens, when plenty of people around me were going through such formative experiences. I hardly socialized either. So unsurprisingly, when I finally acted on the feelings I started to have towards certain members of the opposite sex, I was clumsy and awkward, and I met with no success. I recognized that it wasn't too big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, even if it felt catastrophic to me at the time. I was a downcast but not self-pitying. I realized that I had a lot of personal growth ahead of me before I'd have much to offer to another person. And I felt a little lonely and insecure as a result. That insecurity didn't stop me from opting for a semester abroad. It's something I had always seen as a valuable learning opportunity. And thanks to my school's strong ties with the Danish education program, I soon found myself on a plane from the States to Copenhagen. First couple of weeks went smoothly enough. I explored plenty of landmarks, from ascending the round tower's iconic helical corridor to touring the gigantic Frederiksborg Castle. I also made progress in a basic level Danish language course. Learning the language in detail was hardly necessary, though as virtually very resident there would rather practice their English than to try to decipher a foreign's rudimentary Danish. I first saw her at a crowded bar on a Saturday night. My roommate and I were sipping Carlsbergs when I spotted a woman by the door. She had red hair and pale skin, and there was a particular kinetic energy about her that caused her to stand out from the crowd. For a moment, we made eye contact before, nervously, I averted my gaze to the floor. My roommate announced that he was turning in for the night. No sooner did he leave than she approached me. When I started mumbling a basic greeting in Danish, she smiled and quickly cut me off. "I saw you looking at me. Want to buy me a drink?" Like many Danes, she spoke fluent English with a Nordic accent. Yeah, sure," I said, gesturing for another beer on tap. She introduced herself as Madeline, and at her suggestion, we got ourselves a small table. She asked me a lot of questions, and she seemed to listen intently to my responses. We talked at first about basic subjects, such as my hometown and my reasons for studying abroad, and how she'd grown up nearby but recently returned from traveling through Switzerland and Germany. Before long, we were discussing more personal topics. I explained how my father had passed when I was little, and she shared how she'd recently broken up with a longtime boyfriend. As our conversation stretched into the early morning, I realized that I felt more comfortable around her than I did around, well, just about anyone else. I found her extremely attractive too, which contributed to my excitement. Eventually, she suggested that we depart. "You going to drink that?" I asked, motioning to the still full beer I'd ordered for her. "No," she laughed. "I don't really drink. I just wanted to see if you'd order it for me. Help yourself to it, if you want." I took a deep gulp from it, and I left a payment on the table before following her to the deserted cobblestone street outside. She leaned into me until her face was just inches from mine. "You ever kissed a girl before?" she whispered. "Yeah," I lied, embarrassed over my inexperience. "Ever done more than that?" I smirked. The smirk on her face showed me that she likely didn't believe me. "Just a little," I added, if she sensed I was lying. It didn't seem to bother her. "What do you say?" she said, drawing me away from her. "You hang out with me tomorrow night? I'm having a gathering with some friends and family. Afterwards, we can spend some time together, alone. Just us two." The wink she gave me made my heart flutter. "Oh, yeah, okay," I stammered nervously. Sure, I'll be there. That seemed to please her. She proceeded to describe the route I would need to take to get there. I typed each step into my travel flip phone. As we parted ways, she called to me. Vi ses senere, Danish for see you later. I practically skipped with joy as I made my way home. After so many self-doubts and restless nights, the charming, gorgeous woman had shown interest in me. Of all people. My mind flooded with thoughts of what was to follow. Maybe the event would be awkward, a little would come from it. Perhaps I say or do something foolish like I had so many times before, and I'd never hear from her again. But just maybe this would be the start of something meaningful, or at a minimum, something validating and fun. When I got home, I realized that she'd left me with relatively little specific information. Madeline hadn't given me her last name or even her phone number. I had an address, but I had no idea what sort of building I was looking for or the kind of neighborhood I would be heading into. Her mention of family struck me strange too. Who brings someone to a family event on a first or, if a last night counted, second date? My mind didn't dwell on these particularities for long. Instead, I replayed the wink she gave me when she referenced us being alone together. It was more than enough to silence any uncertainties. I spent the next morning preparing. I showered, shaved my face, I picked up a nice shirt. I tried to think in advance of questions her friends and family might ask me, and I practiced my responses before a mirror. My roommate, sensing my purpose, wished me luck as I stepped outside. At first, the journey was unremarkable. The metro station had its usual glossy, spotless appearance. When the fully automated train arrived, I took a seat near a chatty group of teens, and numerous passengers embarked and departed over the next few stops. Things started to change, reached the Norport station. According to Madeline's instructions, I need to switch to a train on the Silver Line. However, I couldn't find a platform for such a line, nor did one appear on any of the maps throughout the station. I spotted 2 Metro employees and I asked them for assistance. They exchanged a quick glance when I mentioned the Silver Line. Are you sure you want to go there? Asked the first. I nodded, trying to make sense of their grim, concerned expressions. Then follow me, ordered the other, a short, well-built woman in a gray ponytail. She led me up to a small staircase that otherwise would have assumed connected to a custodial closet or a maintenance hatch. At the top, she led me down a shadowy corridor, in a contrast to a polished, pristine look of the rest of the station. The walls and flooring in this area were rugged and dirty. We stepped into a cavernous room, flickering overhead light partially illuminated an empty train platform in its center. A large sign above it read Silver. In contrast to the other platforms, there appeared to be no ticket booth or electronic indicator of when the next train would arrive. When I asked about this, I found to my surprise that the woman who had brought me there was already gone. I was alone. I considered leaving. This all made little sense. The absence of any Silver Line from the map, platform's dingy appearance, and the reaction of the employees. The air had a rancid, foul smell to it, too, and the temperature was much more higher than the rest of the station. But I had come so far, and it had all accorded more or less with the instructions Madeline had left me. I reminded myself, too, of why I was there in the first place. I thought about how comfortable and warm her presence had made me feel last night. I imagined the smile would spread across her face when she saw me, the feeling of her lips pressed against mine, doing more than kissing, perhaps even quite a bit more. Eventually, 2 harsh red lights punctured the opaque darkness and approached like the eye of a hunting predator. As they grew closer, I discerned that they were the headlights to an older, shabbier train than the one I'd used to get here. The smudges across its glass windows and the graffiti that covered its metal exterior reminded me much more of a public transportation in the U.S. than what I'd seen elsewhere in Copenhagen. Even though the train seemed to be at the end of the line, no one who had arrived on it exited. Instead, the handful of passengers in the car I stepped onto remained eerily silent as I took a seat. An empty glass bottle rolled across its dusty floor as the train jutted back into motion, reversing direction into the black void from which it had emerged. I checked the directions Madeline had given me, 7 metro stops, and then a 5-block walk until I reached Spookyboo 27. I'd be there soon enough. I tried to relax as the train sputtered along. The first 2 stops, no one got on or off. By the time the train approached the 3rd stop, I noticed a particular stillness among the passengers in my periphery. Neither the lanky man by the door nor the mother and daughter in matching red jackets in the seats ahead of me had moved an inch since I'd gotten on board. As far as I could tell, everyone around me remained completely motionless. I shifted my gaze to the window on my right. As the train approached the 3rd stop, behind the black glare against the dirty glass and the outside platform's minimal lighting, I could barely make anything out. The doors opened, and again, I discerned no movement onto or off of the train. Staring deep into the shadows outside, I noticed something else odd. The vague outlines of figures, all as still as those in my train car. At the 4th station, I observed the same thing. I couldn't identify any details of the distant spectators. Behind that, they just seemed to be standing there, doing nothing at all. It perplexed me. Why were they there? As far as I could tell, there wasn't any other train on this track. As the train departed, I picked up on another detail. Pairs of tiny neon green dots of light. They were hard to make out at first, but once I noticed them, I couldn't ignore them. Each hovered over the ground, right around where the obscure figures' faces would be. The 5th and 6th stops were the same. Now that I knew to look for them, I detected no fewer than a dozen pairs of these glowing lights, all gazing at the train like eyes that never blinked. As we approached the 7th stop, I wasn't sure what to make of what I've been seeing. The distant figures spooked me, even though I had no reason to think I was in any danger. I reflected on just how alone and isolated I was. After all, I was a foreigner traveling to an area I knew nothing about on a line that didn't appear on maps, all to see someone I'd only just met. I hadn't even told anyone where I was going, but I had to exit the train at some point, even if only to turn around. So I mustered my courage and approached the screen doors, praying that whatever lay in the void ahead of me meant me no harm, and that I'd soon be happily reunited with the gorgeous woman who'd shown so much interest in me. As the doors began to open, my hand shot impulsively to my eyes to protect them from an unexpected, intense wave of what I felt like blistering bright light. As my eyes started to adjust, I squinted to find before me a fully illuminated train platform. To my relief, it was bereft of skulking figures or anyone at all for that matter. Sounds of my footsteps echoed through the vacant train station as I made my way through it. There was nothing odd about its structure or layout, but the absence of other people left me uneasy. I remembered the giggling teens, hand-holding couples I was used to seeing at places like this. Everything around me, by contrast, felt artificial, mechanical, and joyless. The street outside had a similarly ethereal aura to it. It possessed all of the qualities of the vibrant cityscape I'd spent the last few weeks exploring. Cobblestone streets, occasional Baroque churches, crooked houses painted in warm hues of yellow, red, and orange. But it was all quiet, so quiet, and the air carried a suffocating stillness. As I passed by a restaurant, I found myself fixating on the chairs and tables, all uninhabited, like everything else around me. Their design and the layout in general were identical to that of an upscale Italian place not far from my dorm, back in the States. My mind flashed back to the night I had taken Audrey, a girl from my chemistry class, out on a date. Our conversation over the meal had been awkward, She'd acted friendly towards me earlier that night. She'd been guarded and withholding. When the check arrived, I tried to pay it in full, but she insisted on splitting the expense. As we stepped outside, she confessed that she thought we were hanging out as friends and hadn't realized until she had arrived at the restaurant that I'd asked her on a date. I'm sorry, I didn't say something earlier. I just didn't know what to do. When she told me that she didn't see me that way, I said that was okay, and I'd apologize for the misunderstanding. I felt terrible, though I tried not to show it. I dismissed the memory quickly. As I continued towards Madeline's address, a distant noise caught my attention. As I got closer, I recognized it as laughter. At first, I found this reassuring. It was the first sign of life I encountered after traversing so much seemingly abandoned cityscape. But I steadily picked up the unwelcome undertone to the shrill giggles ahead of me. There was a piercing meanness to them. They recalled the specter of a group of people, young people by the sound of it, basking in a peer's humiliation. It was a sound I knew too well. When I summoned my courage to ask a classmate out to prom, a fellow violist named Maria I'd shared a stand with in the orchestra for over a year, she laughed at me like that, and her friends had quickly joined in. Do better, I told myself when I'd cried in the mirror that night. Nobody owes me anything. I do better tonight, I told myself. Everything was going to change. Madeline and I would make a connection so quickly. She really liked me, and I liked her too. Maybe I'd just grown up on the wrong continent. The laughter got louder until right as I reached the alley from which it seemed to have been emanating, it stopped, and there was nowhere there to be found. Just keep moving, I told myself, adding it to the list of abnormalities I fought to keep buried in the back of my mind. I'm almost there. Finally, I reached the street. The first few buildings were businesses, a deli that served distinctly Danish open sandwiches called Smørbrød, a barber's shop, and a camera store. At last, I found myself facing a brick structure with the number 27 affixed to its front door. The sign next to the entrance displayed 3 words, Den Verge Bedman. I knew that den translated to the, but the remaining words were unfamiliar to me. My best guess was that it was a bar or a restaurant. If so, it was a fancy one, judging from the black suit worn by the man by the ornate front desk inside. Incidentally, the first person I'd seen since the train station. I expected to feel some sense of relief at seeing another living, breathing person, but his emancipated appearance and grim expression brought me little comfort. He said something to me in Danish. I think he said, "Can I help you?" But as he spoke a little too rapidly for me to be sure, I just stated Madeline's name, hoping he'd understand that I was looking for her. Madeline? He repeated back to me. He nodded solemnly and then beckoned me for me to follow him. We arrived in a large plain room occupied by at least 24 people. The first thing I noticed about them was how formally they were dressed. My patterned button-down shirt looked outright casual compared to the suit jackets and plain dresses, all muted shades of black and gray worn by everyone else. Naturally, I felt out of place. Nobody said anything to me, but I sensed, truthfully or not, that I was being judged. Why hadn't Madeline told me that this was a fancy event? I wondered too. Where was Madeline? What kind of event had she invited me to? The absence of any food or silverware laid on tables confirmed that I was not, in fact, in a restaurant, as I inferred. Rather, the attendees were standing and chatting quietly, with each other in voices no louder than a whisper. Nobody really seemed to be doing anything in particular. I approached an elderly man standing alone. "Excuse me," I said meekly. "I'm looking for Madeline." A puzzled expression formed on his face. As he looked me over skeptically, my face turned red with a mix of nervousness and embarrassment. I felt so hopeless, lost, and confused. He slowly raised his arm and pointed towards the far end of the room. "Tak," I muttered before nudging my way through the small crowd in the direction he had indicated. My jaw nearly dropped when I saw the wooden casket, which was decorated by an array of lilies and roses. Madeline lay underneath its opened head panel. Her eyes were closed. She was perfectly still. She wore the same clothes I had seen her in the previous night. A display next to the casket read, Madeline Hanning, December 12th, 1994 to September 7th, 2019. It was too much to take in. My legs grew weak and I began feeling dizzy. My mind raced to process what was happening. I was at a funeral home, and Madeline had invited me to her own open casket. Something else struck out to me. Last night, when I met Madeline, it was September 14th, 1 week after the date listed is that of her death. None of this made sense. What was I doing here? How was any of this possible? The old man who directed me shuffled past me and stood next to the casket. He turned his face to the rest of the crowd, which quickly grew silent. I realized he was giving some kind of speech. Was he a relative or a priest, perhaps? He spoke in a coarse, raspy voice. My mind was too astounded for me to grasp a word of what he was saying. I wasn't even sure what it was. I wasn't even sure if it was Danish. The reaction from the crowd baffled me even more. They were laughing. Again and again, the man made comments that I could not understand, and the rest of the room chortled and giggled in response. All I could do was watch, embarrassed and dumbfounded, as I wondered who tells jokes at an occasion like this. Suddenly, all eyes turned to me. Michael, the man hissed, somehow knowing my name. It's time. Time? For what? I replied, exasperated. I looked around the room at the dozens of people staring intently at me. What's happening? What do you want from me? It's not us who want you, said the man. It's her. He walked up to me, then turned to face the casket. I stood frozen as Madeline's corpse sat up. Madeline opened her eyes and placed both hands on the casket mahogany surface, pulled herself slowly upward, and hopped onto the floor. Michael, she said, her voice weaker and coarser than it had been last night. You came. I knew you would. She wobbled towards me, her legs seemingly straining to support her. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Are you, I stuttered. They're going to bury me, Michael, she said, as she continued her approach. As she got closer, I recoiled her rank, putrid smell. Impulsively, I backed up, only for the speaker to grip me tightly, holding me in place. I don't want to be alone, Michael, said Madeline. There's room for both of us down there. No, I gasped as I struggled to get free. No, please. There's so much that I can show you. It'll be just the two of us, and we'll have all the time in the world. Isn't this what you've always wanted, to never be alone again? She stood right in front of me now. My stomach churned as the rotting smell grew even more pungent. The world spun around me as panic set in. I remember tearing the man's hands off me, losing my balance and slamming my head painfully into the casket before I hit the ground. When I came to, my head was throbbing, and I was being dragged outside by two men. Graves glittered the surrounding landscape. A crowd of people, including Madeline, had assembled by a deep pit a short distance away from me. Next to it was a coffin, a much larger one than I'd ever seen before, large enough for two bodies. I couldn't make sense of anything that was happening, but I knew, with a sense of absolute certainty, that I was about to be buried there. I figured my best bet would to act before they realized I was awake. Throwing all my force into it, I lunged forward, managing barely to pull myself free. One of the men dived for me, grabbing my leg and sending me toppling over a headstone. As I scrambled to my feet, I noticed a long metal shovel laying atop a pile of dirt. As one of the men charged at me, I picked up the shovel and frantically swung it. The blade slammed into his cheek, sending him sprawling. Michael, what are you doing? Cried Madeline. I didn't respond. My attention was fixed on the man I just hit. The force of the blow had fractured his skin, cracks spread over his face, which then shattered into small pieces that fell to the ground, revealing the raw bones of his skull and a pair of unblinking, unnaturally bright green eyes. As he got to his feet, seemingly unbothered by the evisceration of his face, my flight instinct kicked in. I remember climbing a fence, ignoring the pain in my ankle when I hit the ground on the other side. I remember the sounds of dozens of footsteps pursuing me and being too afraid to look back. I remember Madeline's voice begging me to return. I ran on instinct, retracing my steps as best as I could. Figures filled the once deserted streets around me. I ignored their missing faces and the green glow they emitted. I ignored the ones who called for me, who said they wanted me, who resembled Audrey, Maria, and so many others whose rejections haunted my mind every time I closed my eyes at night. By the time I reached the platform, I was breathing rapidly and drenched in sweat. Thankfully, a train was already there. I could hear voices resounding through the station behind me. They were getting closer, louder by the moment. I could tell that the train's doors were about to close. With my last bit of strength, I dashed forward and dove between them. Pain shot through me as my body thudded onto the hard surface inside. When I awoke, my body ached all over. I was laying on the couch in some kind of office, and a woman I recognized as the employee who had led me to the Silver Line stood over me. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. I was too perplexed to answer. "What? Where am I?" "My office at the Norport station, just upstairs from where you started." "I don't understand," she shrugged. "You don't have to. You should go home." But, I stammered. "What about the Silver Line and the things I saw?" "Nobody will be riding the Silver Line anytime soon. Just closed down for repairs. Go home." I've never fully understood what happened to me that day. The Metro employee refused to answer any more of my questions. I never saw her again, or any mention of a Silver Line even existing. Nor could I find any reference in an atlas to the part of town that it had brought me to. Once before returning to the streets, I ran into the bartender who'd been on duty when I'd met Madeline. When I asked him what he remembered about the night, he responded that he recalled me sitting alone, talking to myself for hours. "We did have a regular customer with that name," he continued. "After I mentioned Madeline's full name, she told me once that we were her favorite bar in town. Haven't seen her in months, though. I have no idea what happened to her." My physical wounds, bruises, and sprained ankle healed relatively quickly, but inside I felt shattered. I became reclusive, focusing entirely on my studies and, after graduating, on my work. After a few weeks ago, my brother set me up on a date with a friend of a friend who insisted was a good fit for me. Understandably, I'd spent the last few years utterly detached from the dating scene and avoiding any perceived advances. I eventually caved into my brother's persistence. Her name is Clara, and well, my brother was right. She and I formed an instant connection, and so far, we seem to be a perfect match for each other. The other night, we even exchanged a kiss, the first kiss of my life. We were sitting together in my apartment's living room on a rainy Saturday afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a bouquet of lilies and roses sitting on the doormat. "Did you order these?" I asked Clara. She shook her head, her expression puzzled and concerned. A small card pinned to the bouquet displayed a short, handwritten message in black ink. "Death is the greatest equalizer, Michael. When it comes for you, too, know one thing. I will be waiting. V. Sis Senior Madeline." That is a creepy story. I'm very sorry if I butchered the Danish language. Tried my best. Yeah, I really like this story. It was very interesting. I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope y'all have a good rest of your weekend. I will see y'all on Tuesday. I love y'all so much. Until then, remember, it's scary out there. Please like and subscribe.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross